The hum of the HVAC system in the Harrison Auditorium sounded like a death rattle. I stood at the lectern, my palms pressing into the polished mahogany so hard I thought the wood might splinter. My reflection in the laptop screen looked like a ghost, pale, hollow-cheeked, and eyes bloodshot from a 72-hour final stretch. In front of me sat the committee. 5 titans of molecular biology, including Dean Halloway, a man who looked like he was carved out of granite and academic spite. And to my right, leaning back with a smug fatherly smile that didn't reach his eyes, was Dr. Arthur Sterling. My advisor, my mentor, the man who was currently trying to bury me alive. The air smelled of stale coffee and the ozone of high-end projectors. "Whenever you're ready, G-Min," Sterling said, his voice smooth as expensive bourbon. He checked his Rolex, a gift from a pharmaceutical giant he'd consulted for using my lab results. He wanted this over with. He had a flight to Switzerland in 4 hours to present his new breakthrough. A breakthrough that lived in the flash drive currently plugged into my laptop. My work, my life, my blood, sweat, and literal tears. I looked at the dean. Before I begin the technical breakdown of the CRISPR-9 sequencing, I started, my voice cracking slightly. I cleared my throat, forcing the bile down. "I want to address a discrepancy in the primary data credits." Sterling's smile flickered. It was a micro-expression, a tiny twitch in his left eyelid. He leaned forward, whispering, just loud enough for the committee to hear. "G-Min, we discussed the administrative attributions. Don't let nerves ruin your big day." It sounded like a warning. It was a warning. He was reminding me that he held my visa, my career, and my future in his manicured hands. If I missed a step here, I wasn't just failing a defense. I was being deported. I ignored him. My finger hovered over the next key. I thought about the nights I slept on the lab floor, using a rolled-up lab coat as a pillow while Sterling was at gala dinners. I thought about the encrypted folder he thought he'd deleted from the university's server, the one with the time-stamped raw data that proved I was the sole architect of the sequence. The discrepancy? I continued, my voice gaining a cold, hard edge that made the dean sit up straighter, is that Dr. Sterling is listed as the lead author on the pending patent. However, I clicked the button. The screen didn't show the expected graph of protein folds. Instead, a command prompt window bloomed across the 20-foot screen. Lines of green code began to scroll at a blinding speed. It was a digital autopsy. In real time, the projector began displaying a file history log. Every time Sterling had accessed my private drive. Every time he'd hit delete on my name. Every time he'd copy-pasted my conclusions into his own secret draft. The silence in the room became heavy, suffocating. You could hear Sterling's shallow, panicked breathing. The glitch wasn't a glitch. It was a reckoning. I turned my head slowly to look at him. His face had gone from tan to a sickly grayish white. The mask was off. But let me back up. To understand how I ended up at that lectern, ready to commit career suicide just to take Arthur Sterling down with me, you have to understand the sheer grinding exhaustion of a PhD in molecular biology. My life for the last 5 years hadn't been measured in days or months, but in incubation cycles and pipette tips. I lived in the basement of the life sciences building, a place that smelled permanently of bleach, agar, and the faint sweet rot of organic waste. It was a world of fluorescent lights that hummed at a frequency that made your teeth ache, and for a long time, Dr. Arthur Sterling was the god of that world. When I first arrived from Seoul on a hard-won scholarship, Sterling was the academic golden boy. He was everywhere, on the covers of journals, on CNN segments about the future of genetics, and in the dean's pocket. He had this way of walking down the hallway, a trail of expensive cologne and charisma following him, that made every student stand a little straighter. He chose me personally, G-Min. He told me in his office, surrounded by awards he'd probably stolen from someone else, "You have a precision I haven't seen in years. Work for me, and I'll make sure you're running your own lab at Harvard by the time you're 30. I believed him. I was 22, a first-generation immigrant with a mountain of pressure on my shoulders to succeed for my family back home. I became his ghost. The routine was brutal. I would arrive at 6 a.m. to check the cultures. By 9 a.m., I'd have a stack of data ready for Sterling to glance at before he headed to his power lunches. He didn't do the bench work. He didn't even know how to calibrate the new sequencer, but he knew how to talk. He took my raw, messy discoveries and polished them into sound bites for donors. At first, I was grateful. I thought that was the trade-off. I do the science. He handles the politics. But then, the mentorship started to feel more like an internship in a sweatshop. Sterling began calling me at 3 a.m. to complain about formatting errors in papers I'd written for him. He forget to include me in meetings with the very venture capitalists who were funding the CRISPR research I was actually conducting. When I asked why I wasn't invited, he'd give me that paternalistic pat on the shoulder. G-Min, you're too valuable in the lab. These guys just want to talk numbers and golf. You focus on the Nobel-level stuff. Okay, trust me. Trust. That was the poison he fed me every day. By my 3rd year, I was practically living on protein bars and vending machine coffee. My hands had developed a permanent tremor from the caffeine and the stress. I remember one night, it was mid-February, a blizzard was howling outside, and I was staring at a monitor, watching the gene folding simulation finally hit the 99.9% success rate. I had found the key, a specific algorithmic adjustment that prevented the off-target mutations that had plagued CRISPR for a decade. It was the holy grail of gene editing. I was so excited I almost ran to his house. I called him, my voice shaking with pure, unadulterated joy. Dr. Sterling, Arthur, I did it. The off-target issue, it's solved. We have the sequence. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I expected a cheer, a well done, maybe even a mention of the publication. Instead, his voice was flat, cold. Don't upload that to the shared server yet, G-Min. The security protocols are being updated. Keep it on your local drive and bring it to my office tomorrow morning. Don't tell the other lab techs. We need to verify this privately first. That was the first red flag, a giant crimson banner waving in the wind. But I was tired. I was so desperate for his approval that I convinced myself he was just being cautious about intellectual property. The next morning, I handed him the drive. He didn't even look at the data while I was there. He just put it in his desk drawer and locked it. Good work, G-Min. Now, I need you to go back and rerun the control groups for the 2022 study. I think there's a typo in the appendix. The 2022 study? I asked, bewildered. But that's old news. We have the breakthrough now. We should be drafting the nature submission. Control groups, G-Min, he snapped, his mask slipping for a second. Do as you're told. For the next 6 months, he kept me buried in busy work. He had me auditing old files, cleaning equipment, and supervising freshmen. Every time I brought up the breakthrough, he'd give me some vague excuse about peer-reviewed delays or patent filing complexities. Meanwhile, I started noticing him spending more and more time behind locked doors with the university's legal counsel. The atmosphere in the lab changed. The other students started looking at me with pity. They saw what I couldn't or wouldn't see. I was being phased out of my own discovery. Sterling began referring to the project as the Sterling Protocol in his lectures. He stopped calling me his collaborator and started calling me his assistant. The real breaking point came during the department's annual gala. I wasn't even invited, but I had stayed late to finish those mindless control groups. I walked past the ballroom on my way out and saw him. He was standing in a circle of the university's biggest donors, holding a glass of champagne that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Yes, I heard him say, his voice booming with that fake confidence. I spent many long nights in the lab developing this protocol. It was a grueling process, but I knew the sequence was there. I just had to find it. He didn't mention me, not once. He didn't say we. He said I. I stood in the shadows of the hallway, clutching my backpack, feeling a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the winter air. He wasn't just stealing the credit. He was erasing my existence. I was the ghost in the machine, and he was the man claiming he built the engine from scratch. That night, I didn't go home. I went back to the lab. I sat at my station and looked at the login history of our shared drive. I had been blocked from the final results folder. My own data was now restricted access. He thought he was smart. He thought because I was a quiet Asian girl on a visa, I would just take it. He thought my fear of being sent back to Seoul without a degree was stronger than my pride. He underestimated two things: my skill as a coder. I double majored in CS back in Korea, and the sheer vengeful spite of a woman who has been pushed too far. If he wanted a ghost, I would give him one, but I wasn't going to haunt the lab anymore. I was going to haunt his career until there was nothing left but ashes. I began to look into the server's back end. I didn't just want to prove I did the work, I wanted to catch him in the act of stealing it. And that's when I found the administrative draft of the patent. Lead inventor, Arthur Sterling. Secondary contributors, none. Acknowledgements, the lab staff for their technical assistance. 5 years of my life, my health, and my sanity reduced to a footnote about technical assistance. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The shaking in my hands stopped. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just opened a terminal window and started typing. If Arthur Sterling wanted to present his breakthrough at the defense, I was going to make sure it was a presentation the world would never forget. The next 3 months were a masterclass in psychological warfare. To Sterling, I was the same compliant, exhausted lab rat I'd always been. I kept my head down. I said, "Yes, doctor," at all the right times, and I made sure he saw me doing the grunt work he'd assigned. But under the surface, I was a digital insurgent. I knew that simply accusing him wouldn't be enough. In the ivory tower of academia, a student's word against a tenured superstar's is worth less than the paper it's printed on. I needed a trap so airtight he'd strangle himself trying to escape it. The plan started with the logic bomb. Because I had built the original sequencing software from scratch, I knew the backdoor Sterling didn't even know existed. He was a big picture scientist, which was just a polite way of saying he was technically illiterate. He could talk about gene editing at a TED Talk, but he couldn't read a line of Python to save his life. I spent my nights writing a script that would look perfectly normal in the source code, just another metadata tagger. But it had a specific trigger. It was hard-coded to detect Sterling's unique administrative login credentials. If anyone else opened the presentation, me, a committee member, a lab tech, the slides would show the Sterling protocol in all its stolen glory. But the moment his login was used to authorize the final presentation on the auditorium's encrypted server, the script would execute a deep trace command. It would bridge the gap between his polished PowerPoint and the hidden server logs, pulling every deleted file, every revision history, and every time-stamped original save that had my name on it. It wouldn't just show he'd stolen it. It would show when he deleted my name and where he'd pasted his own. But while I was building my digital guillotine, Sterling was tightening the noose around my neck. He became increasingly erratic, his paranoia growing as the date for the Global Gene Summit in Switzerland approached. He started checking my bag before I left the lab. He installed a security camera that pointed directly at my workstation. "Just protecting our investment, G-man," he say, leaning against the door frame, his eyes scanning my desk for a rogue flash drive. "There are a lot of corporate spies in this industry. You're a bit naive about the world. I'm just looking out for you." The gaslighting was constant. One afternoon, I found him standing at my desk, looking through my personal notebook. When I confronted him, he didn't even apologize. He just threw the notebook back at me. "Your handwriting is atrocious, and these calculations on the lateral flow assays are wrong. If you can't get the basics right, maybe we need to rethink your defense date. Maybe you're just not ready for the PhD." My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. "The defense is in 4 weeks, Arthur. The committee has already approved the abstract. I am the chair of your committee," he reminded me, his voice dropping to a low, menacing whisper. "I can pull my support with a single email to the dean. And we both know what happens then. Your F1 visa is tied to your status as a student. You fail, you leave. You go back to Seoul with nothing but a half-finished degree and a reputation for being difficult. Is that what you want?" He was testing me. He wanted to see if I break. I forced myself to look at my shoes, to let my shoulders slump, to play the part of the defeated servant. "No, Dr. Sterling, I'm sorry. I'll redo the calculations. Good girl," he said, and I felt a physical wave of nausea at the condescension in his tone. The pressure didn't stop at the lab. I started getting emails from the university's International Student Office. Routine check, they called it. But the questions were pointed. They wanted to know about my continued progress and mentioned that my advisor had raised concerns about my academic stamina. He was laying the groundwork. If I tried to blow the whistle, he'd already have a paper trail proving I was a failing, unstable student who was lash out in bitterness. I stopped sleeping. I spent my nights in my tiny, cramped apartment staring at the code, verifying the trigger over and over. I had to be perfect. One mistake, one syntax error, and the logic bomb would duds, and I'd be on a plane to Incheon within 48 hours. The most disgusting part was watching him prepare for Switzerland. He bought a new tuxedo. He practiced his keynote speech in the lab, making me play the role of the audience. I had to sit there and listen to him describe my breakthrough as a moment of personal epiphany he had while hiking in the Alps. And then he'd say, gesturing grandly to an empty room, I realized that the off-target mutation wasn't a biological inevitability, but a computational error. I stayed up for 48 hours straight, coding the solution that would change medicine forever. I almost laughed. The 48 hours he was talking about were the 2 days he'd spent at a spa in Sedona while I was actually in the lab, coughing from the fumes and staring at the sequencer until my eyes bled. As the defense drew closer, the tension in the department became a living thing. The other grad students stopped talking when I entered the break room. They knew something was wrong. They saw Sterling taking all the credit, and they saw me withering away under his mentorship. But no one said a word. In the world of high-stakes research, you don't bet against the man who brings in $10 million a year in grants. 2 days before the defense, Sterling called me into his office. He looked triumphant. I've uploaded the final presentation to the Harrison Auditorium server, he said, tapping a folder on his desk. I've locked the file so no accidental changes can be made. You'll be presenting the first half, the history of the project. Then I'll take over for the breakthrough section. It'll look like a passing of the torch. Very professional. You want to co-present my defense? I asked, my voice flat. This was unheard of. A defense is supposed to be the student's solo performance. It's a high-profile topic, G-men. The dean will be there. Several board members. I want to make sure the delivery is up to my standards. Don't worry, you'll still get your doctor title, as long as you stick to the script. He handed me a printed stack of slides. My name wasn't on a single one. It was all Sterling Labs. Stick to the script, I repeated. Exactly, he said, smiling that bright, empty smile. This is going to be a historic day, G-men, for both of us. I walked out of his office, the paper crinkling in my hand. He was right. It was going to be a historic day, but not because of his speech. He thought he had locked the file, but he hadn't realized that the lock was just another trigger for my script. By trying to secure his theft, he had finalized his own destruction. I went to the bathroom, locked the stall, and leaned my forehead against the cold tile. I was terrified. My hands were shaking so hard I had to sit on them. I was about to go to war with a Titan, armed with nothing but a few hundred lines of code and the truth. Stick to the script, I whispered to myself. Just wait for the click. The 24 hours leading up to the defense were a blurred nightmare of fluorescent lights and the metallic taste of adrenaline. I hadn't eaten anything besides a handful of almonds and enough black coffee to make my heart skip beats every few minutes. My apartment felt like a prison cell, so I spent the final night in the lab, hidden in the back of the cold storage room where the security cameras didn't reach. I wasn't working on the code anymore. The logic bomb was already live, sitting like a dormant virus on the university's central server. I was just trying to survive the silence. At 4 a.m., the door to the lab creaked open. I froze, holding my breath behind a rack of reagent bottles. It was Sterling. He wasn't supposed to be there. I watched through the gap in the shelving as he walked to my desk. He looked different in the middle of the night, less like a world-class scientist and more like a thief. He started rummaging through my drawers, checking my notebooks, looking for any physical copies of the data. He was thorough, his movements jerky and anxious. He even checked the trash can, sifting through discarded pipette wrappers. He was terrified that I had a backup. He knew, deep down, that he was built on a foundation of stolen sand, and he was checking for leaks. Watching him from the shadows, I realized that he wasn't just a villain, he was a coward. A high-functioning, decorated coward who used his power to silence anyone who could expose his mediocrity. He eventually left, slamming the door, leaving me in the dark with the hum of the freezers. That was the moment my last shred of guilt vanished. I wasn't just defending my degree anymore. I was performing an exorcism. Morning came with a brutal gray light. I went to the campus gym, showered, and put on the professional charcoal suit I bought with my last bit of savings. I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes were hard, the quiet Asian girl, mask replaced by something sharpened and lethal. When I arrived at the Harrison Auditorium an hour before the defense, the air was already thick with the smell of floor wax and prestige. This was the university's grand stage, usually reserved for visiting Nobel laureates and high-level commencement speeches. The fact that Sterling had moved my defense here wasn't a compliment, it was a marketing move. He had invited the local press, 3 major biotech investors, and the entire Department of Molecular Biology. He wanted a grand stage for his big reveal. I was in the green room behind the stage, checking my notes when Sterling walked in. He was wearing his custom-tailored Italian suit and a tie that cost more than my first car. He looked radiant, the picture of academic success. He didn't even look at me. He went straight to the mirror to adjust his cufflinks. "The dean is already here," he said, talking to my reflection in the glass. "And the representatives from Genentech. They're very excited, Ji-min. Don't embarrass me. I'm going to present the data exactly as it was recorded, Arthur," I said, my voice eerily calm. He turned around then, his eyes narrowing into slits. He walked over to me, invading my personal space until I could smell the expensive peppermint he used to mask his coffee breath. "Listen to me very carefully," he hissed, his voice a low vibration of pure malice. "I've seen how you've been looking at me lately. That righteous victim act. Drop it. Today is about the Sterling Protocol. You are a vessel for that protocol. If you deviate from the script, if you so much as imply that your contribution was anything more than data entry, I will destroy you. I will have your research flagged for ethical inconsistencies. I will ensure your visa is revoked before the sun sets today. You'll be in a detention center while I'm on my way to Switzerland." He reached out and straightened my collar with a jerk. "Do you understand your place now?" I looked him dead in the eye. I didn't flinch. "I understand exactly where I stand, Arthur." "Good," he said, patting my cheek with a condescending smirk. "Now, get out there. The lion is hungry." I walked onto the stage. The lights were blindingly bright, creating a wall of white that hid the faces of the audience, leaving only the dark silhouettes of the committee sitting in the front row. Dean Holloway was in the center, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Sterling took his seat at the side of the stage, leaning back, looking like a king presiding over a court. The dean stood up. "We are here for the doctoral defense of Ji-min Park. Her work, under the guidance of Dr. Arthur Sterling, purports to solve the off-target mutation crisis in CRISPR-9 sequencing. Ji-min, the floor is yours." I stepped up to the lectern. My hands were shaking, but the moment I touched the mahogany wood, the tremors stopped. I looked at the laptop. The presentation was pulled up. At the bottom of the screen, the university's secure login badge was glowing green. Authorized user A. Sterling. He had logged into the system 10 minutes early to verify the files. By doing so, he had walked right into the center of the trap. The logic bomb was primed. Every slide I clicked would now be pulling from the ghost directory I'd created. The one that compared his stolen version of the data against the original time-stamped files in real time. I began the introduction. For the first 15 minutes, I stayed on script. I talked about the history of gene editing, the failures of the previous decade, and the theoretical hurdles we faced. I could see Sterling in my peripheral vision, nodding along, looking smugly satisfied. He even winked at one of the Genentech investors. He thought he had won. He thought I had been broken. Then I reached Section 4, the sequencing breakthrough. This was a part where I was supposed to say, "Under Dr. Sterling's visionary direction, we identified the computational error." I took a deep breath. The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the tiny whir of the projector's cooling fan. I felt the weight of 5 years of humiliation, of being a ghost, of being told my life was worth less than an advisor's ego. In February of last year, I said, my voice ringing out through the auditorium, a breakthrough was made. But to understand the breakthrough, we have to look at the raw data, specifically the version history that was hidden from the final report. I heard the squeak of Sterling's chair as he sat bolt upright. I clicked the next button. Instead of the slide he had approved, the screen turned a deep bruised purple. A massive table appeared, showing 2 columns. On the left, the Sterling draft. On the right, the original lab logs G-Man Park. Red lines began to draw themselves across the screen, connecting the stolen sentences in Sterling's draft to the original timestamps from my private drive 3 years prior. "What is this?" Dean Holloway's voice boomed from the front row. "G-Man, this isn't the abstract we reviewed." "No, Dean," I said, looking directly at Sterling, whose face was rapidly losing all color. "This is the truth. As you can see by the server metadata currently being pulled via Dr. Sterling's own login credentials. The Sterling protocol was actually offered in its entirety on February 14th, while Dr. Sterling was on vacation in Arizona. The logs show he accessed my private drive on March 3rd and began the process of deleting my authorship." Sterling stood up, his chair clattering to the floor. "This is a technical glitch. She's hacked the system." "Dean, I told you she was unstable. This is a malicious fabrication." He started lunging for the laptop, but I didn't move. I didn't have to. The script was already running. The screen began scrolling through the private emails he'd sent to the patent office, emails where he'd explicitly instructed them to ignore any claims from junior staff, and had attached my own work with his name clumsily typed over mine. The auditorium erupted into a dull roar of whispers and gasps. The investors were standing up, their faces tight with alarm. The dean was staring at the screen with a look of pure, cold fury. I looked at Sterling. He was halfway across the stage, frozen in the spotlight. He looked small. He looked like the thief he was. "I'm not finished, Arthur," I said, my voice cold as ice. "Let's look at the financial trail." The sound in the auditorium was no longer a murmur. It was the sound of a high-speed train wreck in slow motion. Sterling was frozen halfway between his chair and my lectern, his hand outstretched like a silent movie villain caught in the act. The lighting from the massive projector bathed him in a sickly violet hue, highlighting the beads of sweat that were now pouring down his forehead, ruining his expensive academic superstar look. I didn't back away. For the first time in 5 years, I was the one with the power, and he was the one who was powerless to stop the clock. "This is an outrage." Sterling finally found his voice, though it was an octave higher than usual, cracking under the pressure. He turned to the committee, his arms waving frantically. "Dean Holloway, this is a clear case of academic sabotage. She's using a deep-fake script. She's trying to ruin the university's reputation because I gave her a poor performance review last week. Shut it down. Turn off the projector." Dean Holloway didn't move. He was leaning forward, his eyes fixed on the screen, where a new window had just popped up. "Sit down, Arthur," the dean said. His voice wasn't loud, but it had the weight of a falling guillotine. "The system is pulling this data from the university's own secure backend. Unless you're claiming the university's IT department is in on a conspiracy against you, I suggest you let her finish." I clicked the remote. The screen shifted from the authorship logs to something much more dangerous, the financial ledger of the Sterling lab. The plan to reclaim my work started with the code, I told the audience, my voice steady enough to cut glass. But as I dug deeper into the administrative permissions Dr. Sterling so carelessly left open on our shared workstation, I found where the Sterling protocol was actually being funded. Dr. Sterling told this committee that the Scripper research was funded by the National Science Foundation. He told the donors at Genentech that their money was going toward clinical trials. I hit the next key. A series of redacted wire transfer receipts appeared on the screen, side by side with Sterling's internal lab budget. In reality, Dr. Sterling was double-dipping. He was taking the NSF grant money and funneling it into a private shell company registered in the Cayman Islands under his wife's maiden name. The Sterling protocol wasn't just a stolen discovery, it was a money laundering vehicle. He was using my research to bait investors, taking their consulting fees into his private accounts, and then using the university's resources and my free labor to do the actual work. He wasn't just stealing my career, he was stealing from every taxpayer in this room. The silence that followed was different this time. It wasn't shock, it was the heavy, suffocating silence of a legal catastrophe. Two of the Genentech representatives were already on their phones, likely calling their legal teams. The department head looked like he was about to have a heart attack. Sterling's face went from pale to a terrifying shade of purple. He lunged for the lectern, his fingers clawing at the edge of the mahogany. "You little ungrateful brat. I brought you to this country. I gave you everything. You'd be nothing without my name on your papers. You think anyone is going to hire a whistleblower? You're blacklisted. You're done." He tried to grab the laptop, but the campus security, who I had alerted an hour before to defense under the guise of protecting sensitive data, stepped out from the wings of the stage. They didn't tackle him, but they stood in his way, their presence a solid wall of blue between his desperation and my evidence. "I didn't just hack the system, Arthur," I said, leaning into the microphone so the entire room could hear my whisper. "I simply restored the files you thought you'd purged. You see, when you deleted the gmin_original sequence.dat file last November, you forgot that our lab uses a mirrored RAID 6 backup system. I didn't have to create anything. I just had to point the projector at the truth." The screen now showed a video clip. It was grainy, black and white footage from the lab's own security cameras, dated 3 months ago at 2:14 a.m. In the video, Sterling could clearly be seen sitting at my desk, looking over his shoulder, and then plugging a drive into my machine. The screen capture overlay, which I had synced to the video, showed him dragging my author tag into the trash and replacing it with his own. It was the smoking gun. It wasn't just data, it was a visual of his betrayal. "The plan was never to just pass my defense," I continued, addressing the committee. "The plan was to ensure that the Sterling protocol dies today and that the Park sequence, the real sequence, is preserved for the public domain. I have already sent the raw, unedited data to the Open Science Foundation. It was uploaded 10 minutes ago, the moment Dr. Sterling logged into this terminal and authorized the final version. It is now free for every researcher in the world to use. No patents, no shell companies, no more lies." The dean stood up. He looked at Sterling with a mixture of disgust and pity. "Arthur, get out. My office. Now. Security, please escort Dr. Sterling to his room and ensure he does not access any university servers." "You can't do this," Sterling screamed as the guards took his arms. He was kicking, his polished shoes scuffing the stage. "It's my lab. My name is on the building. You're nothing, G-man. You're a ghost. A ghost." I watched them drag him off the stage. He didn't look like a titan anymore. He looked like a small, angry man who had finally run out of people to step on. I turned back to the microphone. My heart was thumping so hard I thought it might burst through my suit, but I had one more slide. It was a simple white background with black text. PhD defense. J. Min Park. Topic: the truth. "Now," I said, looking at the stunned faces of the committee, "if there are no further interruptions, I would like to begin the technical defense of my actual research. Dean Hallway, shall we start with the algorithmic adjustments on page 1? The dean sat back down. He took a long, slow breath and adjusted his glasses. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of his mouth. "Proceed, Dr. Park." He had called me doctor. The defense wasn't over, but the war was won. I had spent 5 years being the ghost in Arthur Sterling's machine, but as I began to explain the complex beauty of the gene sequences I had actually created, I realized the ghost was finally gone. I was standing in the light, and for the first time in my life, everyone was finally looking at me. The defense lasted another 3 hours, without Sterling there to interrupt, to simplify, or to steal my thunder. I gave the performance of a lifetime. I dismantled every technical question the committee threw at me with the surgical precision of someone who had lived inside the data for half a decade. When the dean finally asked me to step out so they could deliberate, the room felt different. The air was no longer heavy with Sterling's ego. It was electric with the realization that the university had just witnessed both a birth and a funeral. I walked out into the hallway expecting silence. Instead, I found a war zone. The corridor outside the Harrison Auditorium was packed. Word had spread through the department like a wildfire in a drought. Students, postdocs, and even some of the custodial staff were huddled in groups, whispering. When I stepped out, the noise stopped instantly. A path opened up for me, a sea of shocked faces and wide eyes. But I wasn't looking for them. I was looking for the debris. I found it near the elevators. Sterling was there, flanked by 2 university security officers. He wasn't being handcuffed, not yet, but they were keeping him from re-entering his office. He was disheveled, his expensive tie pulled loose, his hair matted with sweat. He was screaming into his phone, likely at a lawyer who was already realizing his client was a sinking ship. "I don't care what the server logs say," Sterling shrieked. "It's a localized hack. I want her arrested. I want her deported by tonight." He saw me then. He hung up the phone and lunged forward, stopped only by the firm grip of the security guards. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. This wasn't the academic golden boy anymore. This was a cornered animal, realizing the cage door was locked from the outside. "You think you won?" he spat, his voice trembling with rage. "You think you can just walk away with my life's work? I made you, Ji-min. I plucked you out of obscurity. I gave you a platform, and this is how you repay me? By leaking patent-pending data to the public? You've ruined the university. You've ruined the funding for everyone in that lab. You haven't just killed my career, you've killed their futures too." This was his last-ditch effort, the guilt trip. He wanted to make me the villain who took away the lab's funding. "The funding was already dead, Arthur," I said, walking slowly toward him until I was only a few feet away. I didn't feel afraid. I felt a strange, cold clarity. The moment you started funneling grant money into the Caymans, you killed this lab. The moment you decided that my name was an obstacle to your ego, you killed your career. I didn't do this to you. I just stopped helping you hide it. You're a traitor," he yelled. "A pathetic, backstabbing I'm a doctor," I interrupted, my voice dropping to a level that forced him to stop screaming just to hear me. "And as of 10 minutes ago, I am the sole owner of the intellectual property trail for the sequence. While you were practicing your keynote for Switzerland, I was filing a whistleblower report with the Office of Research Integrity. They've been watching your accounts for 3 weeks, Arthur. The university just didn't know yet." The blood drained from his face. The realization hit him like a physical blow. I hadn't just ambushed him at the defense. I had been working with the federal authorities. The logic bomb wasn't just for the committee. It was the final piece of evidence the Ori needed to prove intent to defraud. You went to the feds?" he whispered, his bravado finally crumbling. "I went to everyone," I said. "I went to the dean. I went to the NSF. I went to the patent office, and I went to the press. There's a reporter from the Chronicle of Higher Education waiting in the lobby, Arthur. They have the time-stamped files. They have the video of you in the lab at 2 a.m. They have everything." He slumped back against the wall, the fight leaving his body. The security guards looked at each other, then back at him with a look of utter contempt. One of them actually tightened his grip on Sterling's arm. Just then, the doors to the auditorium opened. Dean Halloway stepped out, followed by the rest of the committee. The hallway went dead silent. The dean walked straight past the crowd, ignoring Sterling entirely, and stopped in front of me. He held out his hand. "Congratulations, Dr. Park," he said, his voice loud enough to carry to the very back of the hall. "Your defense was exemplary. The committee has voted for a unanimous pass with distinction." "Your dissertation is being recommended for the University Gold Medal." A few students started to clap, then more. Within seconds, the hallway was thundering with applause. It wasn't just for me, it was for the fall of a tyrant. Sterling watched this, his eyes darting around like he was looking for an exit that didn't exist. He tried to speak, to offer one last defense, but Bean Holloway finally turned to him. "Arthur," the dean said, his voice cold and final, "your emeritus status is revoked. Your tenure is being reviewed for immediate termination under the moral turpitude clause of your contract. You have 1 hour to clear your personal belongings from the office under supervision. After that, you are persona non grata on this campus." 1 hour? Sterling gasped. "I have 30 years of research in there." "No," I said, stepping forward one last time. "You have 30 years of other people's research in there. And today, we're taking it back." As the security guards led him away, not toward his office, but toward the side exit where a police cruiser was already pulling up, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. The ghost was gone. I looked at the dean, then at the crowd of students who were looking at me, not as an assistant, but as a peer. But the confrontation wasn't just about Sterling. It was about the system that let him exist. As I stood there, a group of the younger lab techs, the ones Sterling had also been bullying, approached me. They looked terrified but hopeful. Jimin, one of them, a first-year named Sarah, whispered, "Is it true? Is the sequence really open source now? Can we actually use it without his permission?" "It's free," I said, and for the first time in 5 years, I felt a genuine smile spread across my face. "It belongs to the world now. Go back to the lab, Sarah. Start the cultures. We have real work to do." I watched them run toward the elevators, their energy reborn. Sterling was gone, his empire was a smoking ruin, and the science was finally free. But as I turned to leave, I saw one last thing. Sterling's Rolex lying on the floor. It must have popped off during his struggle with the guards. The gift from the pharma company. I didn't pick it up. I just stepped over it and kept walking. I had a flight to catch. Not to Switzerland, but to a conference in Washington where I was the keynote speaker. And this time, I wasn't bringing anyone else's slides. It has been 18 months since that day in the Harrison Auditorium, and sometimes when I'm working late in my own lab, I still expect to hear the heavy rhythmic thud of Arthur Sterling's expensive loafers in the hallway. I still catch myself tensing up when the phone rings at 3 a.m. Recovery from 5 years of academic abuse doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow process of unlearning the instinct to hide your brilliance so someone else can shine. But then I look at the brass plaque on my door, Dr. Jimin Park, principal investigator, and the phantom weight on my chest finally dissolves. The fallout from my defense was even more explosive than the university's PR department had feared. Within 48 hours of my presentation, the New York Times ran a front-page exposé titled "The Ghost in the Lab: How a PhD Student Exposed a billion-dollar Academic Fraud." The logic bomb I'd planted didn't just expose Sterling's theft of my work, it provided a digital roadmap for federal investigators to track every penny he'd funneled into his offshore accounts. Arthur Sterling didn't go to Switzerland. He went to a federal courthouse in Virginia. He was indicted on multiple counts of wire fraud, embezzlement of federal grant money, and witness tampering. Turns out, the visa threats he made against me were recorded by the very security software I'd subverted to track his logins. Because he had used university infrastructure to threaten a student's legal status, it was classified as an abuse of power that carried a mandatory sentencing enhancement. He took a plea deal to avoid the maximum sentence, but he still received 4 years in a federal club-fed prison and was ordered to pay back $3.2 million in restitution. His Sterling protocol name was scrubbed from every building, every scholarship, and every journal in the world. In the scientific community, his name is now a synonym for disgrace. Every paper he ever published is being reevaluated. So far, 12 of them have been retracted because he had been borrowing data from his students for decades. I wasn't his first victim, just his last. After the news broke, dozens of former lab techs came forward with their own stories. They called me a hero, but I don't feel like one. I just felt like someone who finally got tired of being invisible. As for the university, they tried to offer me a tenure-track position immediately to save face and stop me from filing a civil suit. I declined. I didn't want to stay in a place that had ignored the red flags for so long because Sterling was a cash cow. Instead, I accepted a fellowship at the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard. I brought 3 of the junior lab techs from Sterling's old lab with me. They are no longer assistants. They are my collaborators, and their names appear in bold on every paper we publish. The Park sequence. Kona, the name the scientific community gave to my open source code, is currently being used in 3 different clinical trials for sickle cell anemia and cystic fibrosis. Because I made it public domain, the cost of the therapy has dropped by 70%. Small labs in developing countries can now run the same sequences that were once locked behind Sterling's private paywall. I don't have the $10 million Cayman account, but I have letters from parents of children in the trials. That's a currency Sterling could never understand. My visa status is no longer a weapon. Shortly after the scandal, I was granted an O1 extraordinary ability visa, and my path to a green card was expedited by the government, partly as a reward for my cooperation in the federal fraud case. I no longer have to look over my shoulder. I no longer have to check my bag. I am no longer a ghost. A few weeks ago, I received a letter from a prison in West Virginia. It had no return name, but I recognized the frantic, slanted handwriting. I didn't open it. I didn't need to hear his excuses, his blames, or his final attempts at manipulation. I walked over to the lab's industrial shredder and watched the envelope turn into confetti. The most satisfying part of this entire journey isn't the awards or the funding or the prestigious title. It happened last month at a global genetics summit, the same one Sterling was supposed to headline. I was the one on the stage this time. I looked out at the audience, and in the front row, I saw Dean Holloway. He gave me a sharp, respectful nod. I began my speech not with a thank you to a mentor, but with a dedication to the students who are still in the basements, still sleeping on lab floors, and still waiting for their names to be seen. Science is built on truth, I told the crowd. And the truth is, nobody does this alone. If you see a light in the lab at 3 a.m., don't just look at the data. Look at the person who found it. They aren't ghosts. They are the future, and it's time we started treating them like it. As I stepped off the stage to a standing ovation, I realized that Arthur Sterling was right about one thing. He did make me who I am today. He taught me exactly what kind of scientists I never want to be, and for that, I suppose I should thank him. But I'm too busy changing the world to bother. I am Dr. G-Min Park, and I am finally done backing up.